My name is Nicole Morin Scribner, and I'm an interviewer with the Voices of Biddeford project. And today is Thursday, April 1st, 2021. And I have the honor today of interviewing Tammy Ackerman. And we're conducting this interview. We're still in the midst of a pandemic, so we're conducting this interview over the internet via Zoom. I'm in my home, and Tammy is in her home in Biddeford. So, welcome, Tammy.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
And
I was gonna say I was gonna have a
so
like
I
a.
usually
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
go ahead.
I was gonna have an April
I'll
Fool's
let you
joke
go.
prepared for you, and I didn't. I couldn't come up with one soon enough. So anyway, happy April Fool's Day.
Okay, well, happy April Fool's Day to you too. So I usually like to start these interviews at the very beginning and by asking you where and what year were you born?
Oh God, that's personal. I I was
If
born
you're,
in
if you're okay with
no,
hearing
it's
that.
fine. It's fine. No problem. Was born in 1964, and I was born in Aberdeen, South Dakota.
South Dakota. Now, I've never been out there. So tell me what South Dakota is like.
Well, it's been a long time since I've been there or lived there. I think I left in 1990. No, what was it? 93, I think. So 94. That's right. I got my dates right. So anyway, it's been a while. It's changed quite a bit, just in terms of its industry and whatnot. It's a hugely agrarian state. And it's split in half by the Missouri River, and we always referred to it West River, East River. I was born East River, which is more the typical plains, cornfields, wheat fields, that kind of thing. Whereas West River was, the Badlands, the Black Hills, kind of that higher arid plain. That's where all the buffalo really were for the most part, and still are if there's any left. But a lot of it is indigenous reservations. So East River was just, it's a more agricultural based economy. I grew up in Aberdeen, South Dakota until 6th grade, and then my family moved a little bit further out in the country, and I ended up going to a different high school, junior high and high school, in a town called Groton. And class of 72 people, I believe, at the time, and graduated in 1983. No, yes, 1983, and went to college back in my hometown of Aberdeen for 4 years. So, the state it's not dissimilar to Maine in that there's a couple of, what we would call urban centers. Rapid City, Sioux Falls, and Aberdeen, where I grew up, were the three largest cities, but the rest of the community was very rural, very small town, America, pretty conservative, overall, with the exception of those three urban centers, which is also typical of Maine and America. So yeah, it's not dissimilar to what we have here in Maine, although I think there's probably definitely a much more liberal mindset, out here than there is in South Dakota, unfortunately. I mean, fortunately for us here in Maine, but yeah.
So tell me about your family, your roots, and how they ended up in that section of the country to begin with.
Yeah, having had lots of time on my hands this past year, I started delving into my family tree a little bit, which was kind of interesting and enlightening. I haven't done one of those DNA tests. I'm a little skeeved out by them collecting my DNA, but um, I found out that on my father's side, which is my maiden name is Ackerman, Ackermans go way back to the Eastern Germany and Western Russia to the Ukraine, which I thought was super interesting. And, there's an Odessa County in South Dakota. And I think there might be one in North Dakota as well, but at some point my family came from that area and settled into North Dakota. And that's when the Ackerman line, which is a German name, got established. And then eventually my father moved to, or was born in South Dakota, in Aberdeen, in my hometown. So that's how we arrived on my father's side. From my mother's side, it was predominantly Germany, England to New Ulm, Minnesota, where a lot of Germans settled in that area, and Watertown, South Dakota, where most of my family, the Stoltenbergs and the Averys, have roots. And they came together in South Dakota, with my mom and dad. So my family consists of myself and my mother and my father and my brother. So a very small family. They're all still back in South Dakota and Minnesota. I was the black sheep, if you will, that decided to like up and vacate permanently. But my family is, working class family, middle America at the time, which, isn't the same thing anymore. But my dad was a bit of a interesting character, we'll put it that way. We're not very close. He held a lot of different jobs, first working for my grandfather in his welding shop. So he was on the road selling whatever they sell from welding shops, and that kind of thing. And then he was in insurance and God knows what else. I think he ended his career as a welder himself. And he had lived in Arizona for a little bit of time and then moved back to Aberdeen. And my mom's not employed. She's 78. Both my parents are 78. And my mom did go back to school when I was a senior in college, which would have been around 87. And she became a freshman to study speech pathology, and worked in that field out West River in South Dakota for a while before she met and married her current husband, and moved to a small town called Britain in South Dakota. And it's part of a ranching family, a farming ranching family that goes back to homestead generations. So my brother is an engineer. He owns his own internet technology company in Minnesota, and he's quite the entrepreneur. But that's it. That's us. It's a small little family.
It's interesting that both of your parents are of German ancestry. Did that, I don't know how many generations they had been in the United States, but were there any German influences in some of your customs or, favorite foods, or how did that influence your growing up at all?
Not at all, really. I mean, my grandmother, my father's mother, would have been first. She was first generation immigrant. Her family, she came over with her family, and then on my grandmother's side, or my mother's side, it might have been two generations. So my great grandparents would have been first to America. So, but by the time it got to us, there weren't any traditions that I was aware of. We weren't a tradition heavy family. We had the family reunion, once a year in Watertown, South Dakota, and we'd go. And you know how kids are. They're not terribly interested in what's going on with the older generation. So I don't remember eating anything weird. My first job out of college that I had in Aberdeen, South Dakota, there was a woman who would bring, I don't know what it was called, but it was basically chicken feet in like a gelatinous, I guess it was pickled or jellied chicken feet, which was like the absolute grossest thing that I could imagine. And I remember her passing those around, and people were like, I'm not touching this with a 10-foot pole. But we didn't really even have any German restaurants that I remember. I think it was part of that whole, we're going to be Americans push and not, hang on to, traditions from the old country. So yeah, we grew up as like, little bratty American kids.
So yeah, I was you alluded to leaving South Dakota, and of all places that you go to the Las Vegas area. That must have been a little bit of a transition. And why did you go there?
Yeah, well, I didn't go to Las Vegas. I went to Nevada, but I went to Reno instead, which is
Okay.
really different than Las Vegas. I mean, it has gambling, which I've never been interested in gambling, but the reason I went west, I was so naive when I had an opportunity to leave, and I hadn't traveled a lot in the United States prior to that. And so when I made the decision, I basically was like, well, all right, I don't want to go any further north because I hate South Dakota cold. I don't want to go anywhere east because my mom says it's overcrowded and, too many people. And I didn't want to go south, and I don't know what reason. I just didn't have like a perception of south. And so I was like, I want to go to the mountains. I want to go west. And so I went to Reno to visit. And I had thought that, well, I'll just stop in Reno for a few years, get my bearings, because I've never really, left home, so to speak, um, and see what it would be like, and then make a move over to San Francisco, over to California, because I really thought California was where I should be. um, but Nevada had a lot of things going for it, no state income tax, all that kind of financial stuff that I don't know why I was thinking about that at the time, but I was. And so I stopped in Reno thinking it would just be a short stay, but I fell in love with the Sierra Nevada mountain range. Just offers so many wonderful outdoor sports opportunities. Lake Tahoe was within a half hour's drive, and it's absolutely stunning. Um, the climate was to my liking, where the winters weren't very long, and then the summers could be hot, but only for a short time, versus like Las Vegas, which is boiling all the time, I think. And so it was like that arid high desert really appealed to me. And then being able to drive over to California to go to the vineyards and visit San Francisco, it seemed like the right place to be at the right time. And I really you know loved it and made a lot of really good friends there. I started a business and sold the business, and it was really cool. It started to foster my interest in historic preservation and public art and arts as community development. I got involved with, some artists and things that were kind of happening downtown. I watched the Nevada Museum of Contemporary Art get built, which is an incredible piece of architecture in the little downtown that Reno had. And so I started kind of fostering this, arts life, I guess, even though I wasn't actively an artist or involved in any organizations, but I started, infiltrating, if you will. I even staged an art show at my house for some artists that I liked. So I started becoming an advocate and an audience member, I guess, more than anything in Reno, as well as like paid attention to what was happening in the downtown with sort of the gutting of the historic neighborhoods. Because of zoning and whatnot, they were allowing these little wonderful brick bungalows, that kind of surrounded the core downtown, and craftsman homes to be purchased by lawyers and professional services, and then basically gutting those neighborhoods, because families pushed out to the suburbs a little bit more. And I watched the sprawl that started to happen with all these, taupe colored and beige colored faux stucco houses going up in all these gated villages that were kind of filling the valley and pushing out like the wild horses and other natural habitats, encroaching on other natural habitats and stuff. And so it kind of awakened this interest in civic design and development, in me, without me really knowing it or having ever studied it. So
Hmm.
yeah.
And so and then, what's your continued career path? I mean, from there to, okay, so you're like, I don't want to go east, I don't want to go north, and you end up in Biddeford, Maine. I mean, I want to hear that
Yeah.
story.
Yeah, it's funny. I like I said, I was so naive about all the wonderful cities, that I could have picked to live in, even before Reno, for that matter. Vancouver and Seattle, and just there's a ton of smaller communities that I just like. I won't live long enough to live in all the places that I would love to live in. It's not possible. But so how it evolved was, let's see, 2004-ish, I guess it was. I had started a small business, a graphic design business. Just that's what I did straight out of college was, marketing communications and graphic design. And I branched out into this little sole proprietor, and then a former colleague joined me, and we paired up to run the company. And we were doing pretty well. We were trying as hard as possible to avoid working for the casinos because they're horrible and they don't pay well, and they string you out forever. So we were trying to like, make a go of it, and we were doing okay. Um, and I had had a house fire prior to that year and ended up rebuilding a house, and so I got to experience like the process of architecture and design, which was painful and fun all at the same time. Um, but as I started kind of just I had this interest in downtown, and I wanted to be more involved in downtown, and my house that I had built was on in a suburb, like it was an old suburb, like a 1960s era, full of like ranch style houses and whatnot. But it was out of town, and it wasn't like within walking distance of my work or anything like that. And I started to aspire to want to live in the urban core, and as I started looking around at real estate prices, and it was bonkers in 2004. This is right, remember, like right before the housing bubble burst. And so real estate prices were sky high, and a lot of it was from Nevada being a non-income tax state. So a lot of Californians would come over and buy these, houses, or build big houses, and drive the real estate market up because they could establish residency in Nevada and not have to pay California income tax, right?
Mhm.
So, understanding like all of that, and then with the interest of wanting to either buy like after I sold my house, took advantage of the housing boom. I wanted to buy a small building and renovate it, and be part of like the revitalization of the downtown. And I couldn't touch it. It just was not financially possible for me to do that. And so, um, my then partner, and I apologize to him now for having dragged him through all this. I hatched this idea that, why don't we downsize and buy a Eurovan and drive around the country and take a look at, maybe some more affordable communities that would allow me to, play out this dream of being part of a downtown revitalization, by, buying and improving a piece of real estate. So we drove from Nevada in our van called Vanna. We named it Vanna.
Mm.
We drove up to see my mom in South Dakota, and then from there our whole goal was to kind of trace the perimeter of the United States, 100%, because we felt like, well, let's live in a coastal community. This, that would be interesting to live close to the ocean. We've always been, landlocked. Um, and so we went through Canada to start out and visited some friends, and then dropped down into Vermont. And then came, like at the very beginning of the trip, came through Biddeford on Highway 1. So we went through Portland, Biddeford. We stopped at the Rennie's store. It was still open on my first trip through, and my partner wanted to get a new pair of Carhartts or something, So we walked around downtown Biddeford, and in 2004, it was a heck of a lot different than it is today. But I was awed by the mills. I had never really seen textile mills, or brick mills the way I saw them in Biddeford. That was my first experience with the mass of like historic buildings all along a river. Um, and, like in South Dakota, when I grew up, it was all like the monolithic architecture there were grain silos, concrete grain silos, and really no, uh, in the small towns, especially, really no interest in historic preservation. So I was, enamored of that. I was enamored of its proximity to the ocean. Not that I go in the ocean; it's just too damn cold for me to swim in. But I like to walk by it, and I like to look at it. And then I really kind of fell in love with like the vibe in 2004, different than today, of course, but the feeling of a really walkable downtown like Biddeford has, and how close it was to the Mill District, and kind of the raw bones of the community, as unloved as it was back in 2004. It had been worse years before. um, but it was still, Biddeford was not the place that people wanted to move to. So we looked around, we wrote down the numbers of a few buildings that were for sale, and I started looking at commercial real estate sites. But then we continued on, and we drove all the way down Highway 1, all the way to Florida, to Key West, back up again around the panhandle of Florida, through Alabama, Louisiana. We hit Louisiana right before Katrina actually
Hmm.
happened. And so we didn't see any of that devastation. We skirted it. And then by the time we got back, we went through Texas. We stopped in Marfa, Texas, and Marfa, Texas was one of the runners up of where we thought we would move to, because there was this cool like arts culture there. Some expats from New York had moved in the 70s, and there was this kind of cool, edgy art culture, but also like an interest in reviving these or revitalizing these historic adobe houses and buildings and whatnot. And so it was this cool and interesting clash of like Texas cow culture with New York arts culture, you know. But we decided that like it was just way too far away from anything, and you had to be rich to live there. You'd have to like own a helicopter or an airplane to like get out, because it was so far away from everything. So we kept going, and the Vanna started having trouble in, I think it was Truth or Consequences, New Mexico, which is also a cool little community. And we had to hightail it back to Reno at that point because I think our brakes were going out or something, and we didn't feel like we could do the coast of California safely, without getting stranded. So we ended up back in Reno and started, talking about the different communities. And I kept following real estate in Biddeford, and a building popped up where Biscuits and Company is currently located in Sugar, and it brought us back. We actually came back. I don't know if we drove that time. I think we might have driven back. I got so tired of like the interstate system. It's so boring. So we drove back and inquired about the building, and in that process met a few people. We met Bob Dodge, who was the economic and community development person at the time, who's no longer with us, sadly. And Bob kind of gave us the lay of the land and, all this stuff. And we tried to make an offer on that building, but locals who knew better, beat us to the punch. And kind of thankfully, because I think it would have been too big of a project for us. So instead, we ended up with this small building that used to be the union headquarters on Franklin Street. It's where the Unite chapter of Union met here. And that's where I met Pete Lamontagne, who many people will know on this video, and started to get drawn into like the local culture. We were sort of minding our own business. We bought this little building, this 3-story cinder block building that was in serious need of repair, and decided that this would be our, owner occupied space. We would renovate it. We would live there. We would work there in the commercial space, and we would rent one of the apartments out, which we did ultimately do that. And it was there where I started getting pulled into local politics, which is not my thing. It's not something I ever aspired to. We got involved in, we were the new folks in town, and people couldn't understand like, why did you come to Biddeford of all the places you could have possibly moved in the country? Why Biddeford? And, for the reasons I cited earlier, we thought it, number one, it was affordable to us. Number two, like the great bones of the community, proximity, to Boston, to Portland, to the ocean, and all of that stuff. Those were all the reasons. But it also felt like something was happening. That there was a group of engaged citizens who were starting to be active, to like care about the city, to buy buildings and renovate them, to really kind of do some good things in the community. And so we got totally sucked into that whole, movement, I guess, which I don't know what wave it would be, because I'm not sure if you could call anything that happened before that a wave, but I'll say it's my first wave of like that spirit kind of happening, where we saw the value in the community, in so many different ways that others sort of abandoned, for better or worse, had vacated to other communities. The trash incinerator was still operating and going strong and stinking up the downtown. And so we got involved in the movement to try to, you know, improve that situation, if not make it go away. And it was all it was hard, as a outsider coming in and feeling like they had some claim, to the community. It was a cultural awakening, and not always an easy process.
I can imagine. One of the
Yeah.
things that comes to mind is, so what was your first business that you opened up?
I was working as a independent graphic designer, so I had a little graphic design studio called North 40 Creative. The North 40 is a farming term. We're going to go plow the North 40. I think it
Mhm.
applies in Maine as well. So I called it North 40 Creative, and I had brought work with me out from Nevada. I was working on my major client was an in-flight magazine for Frontier Airlines, um, which I don't know if it even exists anymore. But with the crash in 2008, they stopped publishing that magazine. There was another one called Midway. I think that airline went bankrupt at that time. And I was doing both of their in-flight magazines, the art direction and publication or production of them. And I was able to do it remotely, um, which was hard because I was on East Coast time and they were all on West Coast time. So it just meant that I had to, like, hit their time frames of 3 hours after mine. So it was difficult, but that all went away in 2008 and 2009. And then I just, started scraping around Maine for work and did okay at it. It was not a lucrative business by any means. And in that whole time period, as a designer, as an arts enthusiast, I connected up with a group of people that were doing a cultural planning um, project, I guess. So it had started out of the Dyer Library and Saco Museum over there, and they had gotten a grant from the Maine Arts Commission to do this cultural planning project. And it was a group of artists, group of business people, organizations, and they were encouraged to include Biddeford in the process, in the planning process. And so, being a graphic designer and someone interested in art, they invited me to be part of that process. And long story short, that's kind of where it led me to Found Engine ultimately. In that whole kind of conversation, I was volunteering for the Heart of Biddeford, the Main Street program. I was actually the president of the board for a short while we were going through a downtown master planning process and talking to all these different, stakeholders in the community. And so from day one, I kind of got not dragged into, but engaged in, what was happening on the ground locally, and sort of discovered my activist roots and interest in urban planning and community engagement.
Mhm. So tell us about Engine. What was the vision that you had with that business, and also especially being a marketing person, I know how important a name is.
Mhm.
Why Engine?
Well, um, I'll get to the second part of that question uh, after the origination story. The origin story, I guess, is
Mhm.
it was kind of a reluctant thing. I never dreamed of nor knew how to start a nonprofit. But in these conversations with the community, the cultural planning process, and this interest in sort of creating an arts community, or fostering the arts community, I should say, that was already here, because there were a lot of artists that were working in the mills. The mills were by no means revitalized at that time, but there were attempts, and it's very typical for communities like Biddeford, that have a lot of available vacant space that's aesthetically interesting and all that, to be adopted by artists, because they're willing to work in spaces that aren't improved because they're affordable. So that had already kind of been happening, and the cultural planning process was a culminating effort. They were trying to organize into an arts community through this process. And I was paying attention, I was participating, I was helping, I had even used my commercial space in the building that we renovated as an art gallery called Franklin Street Art Space. And, it was so funny, like, it was so out of place. Like, we were nestled between George's Sub Shop, uh, the 50s pub, and in kind of a downtrodden part of downtown Biddeford. And then we had this shiny new space that we were doing, contemporary art shows and music events. And so people would, it was wonderful because people would come. We'd pack the little 800 square foot space with people, and people would be spilling out onto the sidewalk and, you know, coming into contact with, locals and, people that had stumbled out of the 50s pub. And, it was just such a cultural, bang, here we are. Um, Not always well received, but then, other things weren't well received by us either. So there was a friction, to begin with. Um, but Engine sort of evolved out of all of those conversations, out of the Heart of Biddeford's downtown master planning process, where, arts and culture were discussed and included. And, what happened first? I think the oh, I'm forgetting their name. Their Kennybunk Arts Group came over and wanted to expand to Biddeford, and this is kind of 2009, 2010, and they established a foothold in the mill with like a printmaking studio. And I thought, well, great, here's an arts organization, they're going to come, they're going to like make this happen, it's going to be wonderful. And then 2010, I think the fallout of the recession, their board said, we're not expanding to Biddeford, we're going to stay in Kennybunk. And we're not going to spread too thin. We can't, they couldn't afford to do it. I think they were having financial troubles at the time. And so the Twin Cities cultural planning process resulted in the Twin Cities Creative Council, which I think was supposed to kind of act as what Engine eventually picked up. But they lasted 1 year. They weren't adopted. They couldn't afford to keep a director because neither city invested in the group. And so it just dwindled, within a year's time. And so it sort of presented this opportunity where, okay, it's like, all right, if this group from Kennybunk can't do it, if this, Twin Cities Creative Council can't do it, then I guess we have to do it. So that was the birth of Engine. And we didn't take the same form as what the Creative Council was going to be. That would have been more akin to like an arts agency that didn't necessarily have a space or, do programming in the same way, but more as a lead organization and supporting other nonprofits. So Engine itself decided to do some of that work because we knew I had seen through my travels, through paying attention to other organizations that located in sort of blighted neighborhoods that helped infuse energy and vitality to that neighborhood. And it started snowballing from there. And I was a fan of Richard Florida's Rise of the Creative Class, which talked about how diverse communities thrived better than communities that didn't try to attract the arts or the gay population or diversity in any form. So we said, okay, we're going to pick up the banner and we're going to run with the arts banner. And so we did that, and we founded Engine. And the first thing that we did was we helped stage a large scale installation in part of the North Dam Mill, which is part of the Pepperell Mill campus now, but it's that piece that juts out closest to the river by the smokestack, and it's still vacant. It'll eventually get filled up, but we staged a large scale installation there with an artist by the name of Amy Stacy Curtis, who was doing this, by an annual exhibition in vacant mill spaces. So we facilitated that. It was a great success. I don't think that many people from Biddeford probably attended it, but people came from outside the area, and that was part of it, right? Like this marketing piece. We're going to attract people into the community to show them it's like Biddeford's not scary. It's not full of you know, gangsters and mobsters and whatnot, you're not going to get mugged, walking down Main Street. It's not dangerous, for God's sake. So it was a marketing campaign to a degree, not only an authentic interest in supporting the arts in Maine, but a marketing campaign for Biddeford. So we started there, and then I can't even remember all the different things that we did, but we ended up opening a space eventually in what is now the building that houses Elements. We were the first tenant in that building. It was still under construction or under renovation. We had, dust falling down our heads from the floors upstairs, and we planted our flag in that building. And then we had these wonderful shows. Hundreds of people would come. We really focused on both curating, high quality shows by artists that were in Maine specifically, but also community shows. And one of the best shows that we did early on was called Merc. And if you'll recall, everybody referred to the trash incinerator as Merc. But we used the acronym, but it stood for Mainers Recycling Cardboard. And the requirement was that their projects had to, the things that artists submitted had to be predominantly made out of cardboard, preferably recycled cardboard. And the amount of work, the creativity and the ingenuity of what people produced for that show was just so much fun. I had great photos of it. I can't even describe some of the things. There was somebody built a boat, a cardboard boat to scale. Other people used cardboard to weave baskets, harkening back to traditional, basket making in Maine. And the community got to participate, and it was just so much fun. And it really kind of showed the power of what the arts could bring to the community, this connectivity and celebration of what's seen as kind of a negative into a positive. I think we followed up that show. I don't remember the timeline for any of this because I have a horrible memory for dates, but we did another show that was focused on history. And so Pete Lamontagne, who I mentioned earlier, my Franco friend, he's like the Franco and the German is how we refer to ourselves. He and I hit it off, and we approached him to curate a photography show, because we knew that people loved history, hence why I'm here, right? And we're nostalgic for that time. And so I knew Pete he was an amateur photographer. He is still, he's not passed, but had an interest in like the history as well. And so we knew that there were all these like bowling leagues historically in Biddeford, and it was like such a culture. There were photos of like the mills and that kind of thing. And so we curated with Pete a show of photography called The Way We Were. And the intent was to follow it up with a show called The Way We Are Now, and then The Way We Will Be. But I think we lost steam on that and lost the thread and didn't really finish it. But that original show was great because Pete went out and got photos. We borrowed photos from people that had grown up in Biddeford and had deep family roots. And those people showed up for the opening, and they came for the show. And it was just a great celebration. And again, like illustrated the power that arts have, to connect people that wouldn't normally, hang out together. And we did more of that down the road too. We did shows where we did this show called the Rumpus, and the Rumpus was an open call show where anyone and everyone could participate as long as the work wasn't, considered profanity or hate. And so you had kids, as young as 6 and 7, adults with disabilities. Those organizations participated. We had hobbyists and professional artists. What really kind of made it work was the generosity of a lot of the professional artists who might say, I'm not going to put my work in that show. Like I want to make sure that my career path is all professional exhibits and that kind of thing. But because we had such good rapport with the arts community in Maine, they participated. And it was so cool to see like a 6-year-old girl next to a piece by Amy Stacy Curtis, or any number of like professional artists, and feel good about that. Like it showed these young people and others that, like, oh, I'm part of this. I'm part of this community, and it was just so important for me to like make sure that that was part of Engine's, you know, philosophy, is that inclusivity part.
Mhm.
Right. I just talked a lot.
Oh, no, that's okay.
Yeah.
It obviously shows that that enthusiasm, it can be catchy. Because one of the things that I thought about is, my early years were in Biddeford, and, my roots are, my parents were mill workers, and not everyone in Biddeford is like that, but there are a lot of people, and I know them as being concrete and practical, and no frills. So trying to, sell art and creativity, to that segment of the population, which is, I think, for a long time has been, what Biddeford was about, would be a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah, it was, like I said, it was contentious in some areas and hard for me, hard for others to kind of see eye to eye on it, and it really wasn't about selling art, like as a physical object, even though I wanted to sell art because I wanted the artists to feel valued. But it was more about selling art as the concept of community building, and I was doing this all like without any training in the field. It was more like a gut intuition of like having seen it work, understanding, the value of it, experiencing it myself, but then trying to communicate it to these people, many of them who were in city government, to show the value of what Engine could do, was difficult. It was really hard, and I'm not sure it still is understood. I think it's going to take a lot longer and more successes. And obviously, Biddeford's in a, um, place right now that's difficult, just like everybody in the world, so it's a little bit on hold. But art can connect, and people, after a year of being isolated and, like, art has a health benefit to it in that it can connect different cultures, different people around this idea, of joy. And that's the piece that I think gets overlooked. It's not about like, you know, um, I mean, it isn't about like the quality of the art. It definitely is about the quality of the art, but it's beyond that. It's more about like artists can see things in a different way frequently, right? Than a person who's not an artist or doesn't consider themselves an artist. And so that creativity, that ability to sort of connect the dots that is unique to an artist can help in so many different areas, by being able to look at a problem differently, and find different solutions that aren't necessarily obvious to bureaucrats or people that don't think like that. So yeah, and to answer your question about the name of Engine, it was just that. It's like the engine, like, let's go, let's start this up, let's create an engine for community development, let's create a, some energy and, um, gas, fuel behind. There were so many different metaphors that we could have chosen, but it always sort of, pleased me when I heard people mention the engine of the arts community, the engine of economic development, the engine of community revitalization. I was like, haha, we were part of that.
Well, it's interesting that you bring up the holistic impact of art, especially as we're in this isolation phase, hopefully coming out of it. And from some of the stuff I've seen and some of the stuff that you said, is it also generates some economic benefits. I think I had read in some of the articles where a quote was, "Commerce follows culture."
Hmm.
Where that it brings in people and it kind of grows, kind of multiplies. And
Hmm.
it's interesting to probably, with each success, then it kind of builds on each other.
Yeah, it's an interesting paradigm. Know what the right, is it, a double entendre, commerce follows culture. What that really was intended to mean is that culture first, like, without culture there's no commerce, that it's actually more important to celebrate and embrace and advance culture than it is business. I mean, a lot of people would disagree with me on that one, obviously, because we need jobs, and I don't discount that at all. But that was sort of the intent of that statement. And historically, what the double-edged sword of all of that is, and I think we're seeing it now here in Biddeford too, is that the pioneers are the ones that, and I'm not saying I'm a pioneer by any means, but Engine was pretty pioneering, at the time, because even though it had been done, similar things had been done in other communities, it hadn't been done here yet in Biddeford. And, we were part of that first wave that I referred to. And what happened was it started attracting some businesses, people into the downtown. And I was always very downtown focused, and I would never deny that. I got accused of being too downtown focused. It's like, I don't care about the Five Points shopping center. I don't care about Biddeford Crossing, whatever. That's not my interest. I don't care about the suburbs, like I'm focused on this piece of Biddeford. I mean, I do care about those areas, but I'm saying not with the focus of Engine. So the double-edged sword piece is that, the people that come and sort of, and it wasn't just me alone, that do the hard work, that take that risk, then if there are successes, sort of get obliterated in that process. Like where we're at now today in Biddeford is, a time of great, I would say, prosperity, in a way, but not for everyone. There's a great prosperity for developers, for sure, because there's opportunity here to purchase buildings and make money on them. So when the arts move into a community, they create a culture, a culture of interest, that people start to be like, well, what's going on in downtown Biddeford? I heard there's this show at Engine, or this music event at Open the Axe, or whatever, and then people start coming and they're like, oh, well, maybe I could start a little business here too, and so those things started to happen. And really kind of when it started to shift into high gear was my partner and I were friends with the people that started Banded Brewing, and he's friends with the woman in that relationship, and Celia Johnson, and we knew that they were looking at Portland to start their brewery. There wasn't a brewery in Biddeford yet. And so we glommed onto them and said, you've got to come to Biddeford. You can't, like, don't go to Portland. Like, we need you here. And so we used our connections of knowing all the different property owners to basically traipse them through the entire Mill District and the downtown, and wouldn't let go of them. Just like, come on, you got to have your thing here. We need you. And so they decided to open the brewery here in Biddeford in the North Dam Mill complex. And that started kind of a snowball effect. I think Elements Coffee came either right before them, or it was kind of at the same time. I can't remember which one came first. They'll correct me if they watch this. But so Elements, the coffee shop, was like the next thing. So those two, I would say, those two businesses were like the anchors to what has now become like a food revolution in downtown Biddeford, or restaurant revolution. There's what now, 4 breweries or something like that, a gin distillery, all these different things, a couple coffee shops. It started this wave of interest in the restaurant culture. And now, now developers are interested in Biddeford because they see the good bones. People were buying buildings and renovating them, and buying triple deckers and renovating them, and that kind of thing. And then all of a sudden, it's like the big guys came because there was a culture here. Like, I mean, not that there wasn't a culture before, but there was a focus on the culture. There was a focus on history. You had the Biddeford Mills Museum, the Biddeford Cultural and Heritage Center, all these groups that were working in their own way to sort of shine the light on both history and art and culture. Sort of helped that first wave of small development happen, and then come the big developers. And then all of a sudden, like, housing prices get really expensive, and all of that starts to happen, and it becomes a little bit difficult for arts and culture organizations to find available space. And to stay and for artists to find affordable studios. And, I think we're right at that cusp, in Biddeford, where if they don't start paying attention to that kind of thing, they're going to lose some of that. And it happens. I remember sitting at a meeting in Saco around branding of Saco and Biddeford. There was like a branding campaign happening before all this kind of started happening. And we brought up that topic of like affordability and, the dirty G word of gentrification. And everybody's like, oh, we're so far away from that. We're years, if not decades from it becoming unaffordable to like, to live in Biddeford or Saco. And it's like, okay, guys, I think we're here. You can still find places, but it's not going to be, as easy as it was before. And it's especially not going to be as easy as it was for people that, are not as professional, like don't have professional jobs, are more of the service industry, and, the economic disparity is pronounced. So anyway, got off on a tangent there, but it's something that I pay attention to. The role of arts in a community is important, but it can also not backfire, but like I said, be a double-edged sword of gentrification.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that spurs or sparked a question for me when you're talking about space, because one of the things that I saw is you've had some very generous donations, including downtown building, and there's been quite a history behind that. Is it the Marble Building?
Marble block, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So talk to me
Yeah.
about Marble Block.
Well, I think that was um, that's a hard one because it's in its last weeks of wrapping up. Um, not to the vision that I originally had for it, which is sad in my book. But there were a lot of factors that went into that whole saga. And to start from the beginning, when Engine got started, we didn't have a home, and we were looking around downtown Biddeford, and there was a lot of available space. And we had been kicking tires with a couple different places, and because I had lived here, I had a building on the opposite side of the old Rennie's building. I kind of watched it. I watched them leave to Saco. I watched the building sit vacant for many years. I watched the building start to deteriorate because we actually hosted a craft fair in there at one time, and it was just horrible. It was, water had been leaking in, it smelled like cat pee in there, and it's just like, it was not good. And so I knew the condition of the building, and as Engine was looking for space, my partner and I just sort of hatched this idea that it was for sale, and nobody was buying real estate in downtown Biddeford really at that time. And we approached the Rennie family, and Mary Kate Rennie is wonderful, and she's married to one of the grandsons of the founder of the Rennie's family. And Mary Kate is a formidable force in downtown Damascotta. She's very much a downtown revitalization advocate, and we spoke with her and told her the story of our Engine, aspirations for Engine and our focus on the arts, and proposed the idea that they should just donate the building to us, and we'll make it an art center. And it's better than selling it for $300,000, which is less than what you probably have into it, and you take the tax write-off and whatnot. And to our surprise, they did. It totally shocked us. They came back to us about a month after we asked and said, are you guys ready to take this building? And we're like, oh my God, no, but okay, what's the worst thing that could happen? So Engine at that time was like a year old. I think we were a year into trying to get our foothold, and we got this massive donation of this building and had no clue really, what to do, how to make it go forward. And so we just resolved to stabilize it, mothball it for a little while until we could figure it out. But Engine needed work, it was a startup nonprofit, and didn't have money, at the time, and it was all I could do. I think I wasn't even getting paid at the beginning. It was all I could do to eke out, a part-time salary, and then eventually, sort of a full-time salary, for a while, and focus on like developing the organization and hold on to that, what was a liability at the time, hold on to this building, until we could focus our energy on it. So we just buttoned it up, made it watertight, and so it didn't leak, because water is the worst enemy of historic buildings. And then just focused on building engine, which we did for a few years. And then we were approached by someone who said, you guys really should try to figure out how to like remediate that structure, because it was full, the basement was full of asbestos. There was lead paint everywhere in the building. It was, basically a toxic environmental site, and so we turned our attention to trying to clean up the building, to internally make it safer to be in. And so we formed a second nonprofit called the Marble Block Redevelopment Corp that I was the president of, because we wanted to keep a close, relationship between Engine and this other nonprofit. And that nonprofit got a couple of EPA grants to, to remediate the building. So I was both trying to run Engine, create programming, and hire people so that they could help with that, run an organization and handle the remediation of a historic building in downtown Biddeford at the same time. So, a few years passed, and we completed the second phase of remediation on the building, and we started down the path of thinking about like, how do we push it forward? Like, how do we actually do this project? And it was hard, like it needed hundreds of thousands of dollars, if not millions of dollars of work to make it even able to be occupied for any reason. And up until 2019, we were carrying that idea forward, that we were going to be able to do this project. And we had brought on a development consultant through a grant. We basically created a line of equity from the building to be able to hire some services. And we got to a point where it was just too much of a lift for Engine's board and myself to do that and sustain a still young nonprofit, Engine. So in 2019, we were forced to move out of our second location. And the rest of that year, from June 2019 on, it was really, the focus was on, well, where is Engine going to go? What place do we move into? We can't move into the Marble Block. It's not ready without hundreds of thousands of dollars of work. So the timing was bad, and we ended up moving Engine into the former Bangor Savings building on Main Street. It used to be the Pepperell Trust building on the corner of Washington and Main Street. So we moved in there and repurposed it into, from a bank into an art space. Took over the whole second floor and opened artist studios and the former professional offices upstairs. And did what we could with that space, still anticipating that we'd be able to eventually move into the Marble Block. And then in 2020, what happens? An unprecedented pandemic, and I had announced my resignation in January of 2020, because my partner and I were going to move to Boston. He took a job in publishing, and their offices were in Boston, and neither of us are commuters. So we decided that we would go that direction. And so I sadly, it was very emotionally hard for me to, announce that I was going to be leaving the organization that I founded and had put so much blood, sweat, and tears into over the years. But again, that combined with the pandemic, the board was just like, we've got to sell the building. We can't carry it any longer, especially with having to bring on a new executive director and, all of that. And it was heartbreaking for me to have to let go. And it's still heartbreaking for me to say, we didn't realize the vision, that we had. to create a permanent home for the arts on Main Street, um, yeah. So that's where it's at today. We listed it for sale in May of 2020. Uh, we signed a couple of purchase and sales, but the pandemic threw those for a loop and the buyers backed out. One of them was a really interesting proposal to create a vocational learning center in downtown Biddeford. And I thought, well, if not Engine, could it be something like that that contributes to the community? And um, today we're entertaining an offer, and I don't know what the end result of that, if it goes through, what it's going to be. But we've held strong that Engine needs to have a foothold there. It needs to be part of the property in some, as a tenant, and hopefully that's what's going to work out. It won't have the burden of renovating the building any longer, which is probably the right thing in this point in Engine's life. But it's still hard, to let go of that vision and that dream. And so many people were so generous. Foundations supported the project, over the years. And I guess I sort of look at it as a failure on my part to not have been able to achieve the vision. But then on the other hand, we're going to put a bunch of money in the pockets of a nonprofit arts organization to make sure it's sustainable, that it can weather this pandemic, and it'll continue on. It'll do good things. It'll find a home, permanent home somewhere, hopefully. And it'll have, some contingency funds to do that with. So that's where we are as of today. We're waiting to hear what happens, on the culmination of that.
Wow. Yeah, it must be difficult to let go of that, considering all of the time and effort you put into that.
Yeah.
I'm going to take just a little bit of a step backwards because I kind of want to get it on the record, because this has been such a big piece of downtown Biddeford. And you mentioned the acronym MERC. Tell me your version of the MERC story.
Well, I came in, actually that's where I was recruited into like activism. So Richard Rames, who people will know, and I don't know if it was Pete Lamontagne. I think it was Richard Rames who came. I remember the day where I was working on my building on Franklin Street. I think we were putting the windows in the front or something, and Richard Rames came and said, "We need new voices. We need new people to come and speak out against this environmental travesty, and there's a campaign to rid downtown of the trash incinerator." And I was like, well, that sounds interesting. Okay, great. I'm going to go. I don't like the smell of garbage, wafting through the downtown, and God knows what else, polluting the environment, and, the fact that it's, sort of an economic barrier to like other businesses wanting. So I bought in, I was naive about, the fact that people worked there, that there were good paying jobs, and that would be at risk. So, but I got recruited in, so I went to the hearings and spoke a couple times and was part of the group, working to rid the downtown. And, it was hard because I made enemies in that process. I won't name names, but it was difficult, and especially as an outsider. The other thing that I learned when I came to Maine and Biddeford in particular, but I don't think it's unique to Biddeford, is that uh, the years that you've lived here, no matter how active or engaged you've been in the community, or how much volunteer work or whatever you've done to help improve the community, doesn't matter. It's all ranked on a scale of like how long you've lived in the community. So, people would get up and say, "I'm so and so from such and such ward, and I've been here for 40 years," or, "I'm so and so, and my grandfather settled here." And it's all like important, valid stuff. But if that person never lifted a finger to improve the community, does like, is the scale the same, at that point? And so that was sort of an interesting, illuminating uh, baptism into local politics. I didn't like it, but I learned some hard lessons. And I actually ran for council. God, I don't know who put me up to that, but I didn't win. It was in Ward 5, which is the downtown community, and there was so much apathy. I think maybe like a total of 800 people voted in the local election, and maybe today I might have a better chance, but back then I was just seen as an outsider, Um, but yeah, it was hard. I do remember like when my former partner and I were moving to Biddeford from Nevada, it was we were packing our U-Haul truck the night that they were having the vote on whether to extend the contract, I think, with the trash incinerator. There was some initiative, I can't remember. It was like something that, was going to either close the incinerator or something like that, or uh, and I remember saying this to my partner. It's like, oh, they can't possibly, like, they can't vote that down. There'd be no way, no way that they would vote to keep the incinerator, right? And then the next morning we're like, oh my God, they voted to keep the incinerator and our U-Haul truck is packed, and here we go. We're gonna move to a town that has an incinerator located in its downtown that has, been controversial for 30 years, So we came, I got recruited into the whole anti-Merc thing, for better or worse,
What do you
and
think turned it around to its
its
uh,
demise.
demise? Yeah.
Economics purely. I think we could have chained ourselves to the, to the facility and done everything, that environmental activists do and whatnot, for years, and it still would have operated as long as the economics worked. And so what changed was, and I don't remember exactly when it closed down, 2012 maybe, or something. It was closed down by the company, right? I believe that the company, it was no longer economically viable. Like the price, what happened? It was something to do with like the price of trash and the cost of uh, getting it there changed, so the dynamic changed, and it wasn't as lucrative. Simple as that. And so, they were closing down, and the city, the company could have sold it to yet another, like a junkyard dealer or whatever, and they could have had like a giant, like junkyard on the site of Merck, but the city had the foresight to buy it. And, it was controversial. Obviously, people lost jobs, but it wasn't necessarily the city's fault. It was the company, from my point of view and understanding, that changed the economics of it. And that's what got it out of town, you know?
What are your thoughts on the clock tower?
Oh, yeah. Um, I think it's very important to preserve history. Total advocate, and the story behind how it got removed in the first place is a travesty and was just wrong. It was such a horrible thing. It didn't have to come off of the mill. It shouldn't have come off the mill. Uh, all but for, some vindictive people taking it off the mill. Um, but here it sits, and I think it's important. It's such a iconic piece of, Biddeford history that I really hope the group that's working on raising money for it can do it. I think the plans that they're showing, are good, to put it up on, a bit of a pedestal and off the ground, and I think it's super important to do that. I think having the Biddeford Mills Museum and the Biddeford Cultural and Heritage Society have a visible face is really important, because we come from history. We need to remember, so that we don't repeat bad things, and can celebrate the good parts of history, and um, become more enlightened and all that good stuff. So, I think some of us had hopes that the group that bought the Lincoln Mill would put it back up there, but I just don't think it was possible. Um, cutting the support system that it was on, you just could never put it back up there and think it was going to be stable. So I don't necessarily blame the developer for not doing it. I wish the developer would pay to, like, put it up on something. I wish he would just write the check to the group, the clock tower group, and say, okay, we're done with that, Um, that's the piece that like is really irritating to me. It's like all this development, all this money going into, what are going to be market rate apartments, and you know uh, are going to continue to raise the cost of living in Biddeford. There has to be some give back, from these groups that are making money on these. And I know they outlay a ton of money, to do these projects, and there's a huge amount of risk and all that stuff. But there should be some sort of give back, and I think they could sneeze and make that project happen pretty easily, and be then celebrated for it instead of whatever. you know don't get me started on public art. I tried for a long time to try to get the city to pay attention to how public art gets funded and what public art can mean for a community, and all that, and it just sort of fell on deaf ears. And I'm done fighting that battle. It's someone else's battle to fight now.
Well, I was reflecting on, we started this interview by you telling us what you saw when you first walked down Main Street in Biddeford. And I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on, what do you see now, this many years later, when you walk down Main Street in Biddeford?
Well, the age of people walking around downtown has changed immensely. It's we're the youngest city or town in Maine now, I think, and that that was just something. Wow. I was in my 40s when I came to town, and so I'm older than like some of the people that are starting businesses now on Main Street, and or I was older at the time. So I see this like enthusiasm and excitement, to be able to afford, because even though housing prices are rising and becoming sort of unattainable for some, commercial storefront spaces are still affordable, especially on Main Street. I think it's comparable to the mill. And I think as the mills get filled up with, all the available space in the mills gets filled up, it's starting to spill out onto Main Street. So I think it's really cool to see, businesses like Sweet Cream Dairy buying a building, which is our old home, Engine's old home, and wanting to, put their business in there at some point. Hills and Trails, all these like little mom and pop shops, Lauren Wine, Time and Tide Coffee. There's just a myriad of, small business owners that have decided that Biddeford is a good place to be to start their business. They're taking a huge risk because we're not Portland. Like, foot traffic isn't the same, and the quality of what's being offered here is wonderful. It may be a little expensive, but it's wonderful. And I'd love to see a more diverse, I'd love to see more culturally diverse type foods, restaurants come into the downtown, different, shops that offer other services and things that appeal to different cultures. I'd love to see that continue to be promoted and worked on. But downtown Biddeford is prettier than it's ever been. There's been an interest in making the parks more welcoming, the open spaces. I wish there was more street furniture. I wish they would slow traffic down on Main Street. It's still dangerous, to cross Main Street. I wish that they would, the city would capitalize and focus on pedestrians versus cars. But that's just all part of me and what I like to experience when I go to an urban center. Yeah, it's a good time for Biddeford, and the mills are pretty amazing. They're full of such diverse businesses and light manufacturing and food, and it's just pretty incredible. People don't see that because the mills have always been a little bit difficult to penetrate, visibly. So, the 150 plus businesses that are operating in the mills, a lot of times people don't even know they're there.
Mhm.
So I love the fact that we have two wonderful coffee shops, that, there's a wine bar now, and, all these different things. But I still will go to Jonesy's and have breakfast, or we used to before the pandemic. We would, patronize like all the local businesses, the Indian restaurant, the Thai restaurant, the Vietnamese soup restaurant. Those things are all so important, and I hope can sustain, rising real estate prices. I would hate to see that mom and pop culture be lost, in downtown.
Now, in your time here, you've won more than a handful of different awards. Is there one in particular that was most meaningful to you?
I'm not an awards person. Gosh, what was it? I think it
But
was the Chamber of Commerce, and I don't remember the title of the award. Because I just like that stuff is wonderful, and it's a wonderful honor, but I can't remember the title. So the Chamber of Commerce hosted an event, and they did a really good job of. It was David Flood kind of behind this, but they gave me an award, and they were able to keep it so secret that I showed up at this breakfast that they hosted, and there was like 300 people or so there, and Delilah Kapoor, who is the Heart of Biddeford director, basically was responsible for getting me there. And I was like, sure, I'll go to the chamber breakfast for you. It's the word ceremony, right? And so sitting at that table, we're eating our scrambled eggs and whatnot and listening to the presentation. And I think it was David Flo. I can't remember who. My memory is so horrible. I swear. It's just like, it's the worst thing about me. They were giving, they were talking about the recipient of this award, and, I still didn't know who it was. And I'm sitting at the table, and then they said something, and I kind of went, oh, 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 they're talking about me. Oh my God, this is embarrassing. I hate the spotlight. I don't, I don't want to be the center of attention. And I'm sure my face just turned red, and, I had to get up and go get this award. And David Flood had, he was the on the committee that helped choose the person, and he had this wonderful sculpture done by Ann Thompson, who is an artist in the community. She's a metalsmith, and I know Ann pretty well, and so they had commissioned her to design this wonderful little object. It was kind of, I'm not sure exactly what it is. It's like a pen holder or something, but it's this beautiful pewter object, and it had scenes of downtown Biddeford, on the outside of it, and it was just really sweet and totally embarrassing and wonderful. But that, I would say, that was probably the highlight. Yeah.
so what's your vision for your next step?
I really don't know. I'm so fortunate to, be working as I'm doing independent graphic design work for my partner's company, but also for some other people locally. So I'm fortunate that I can fall back on that and do it from, the comfort of my home. We were supposed to have been gone by now and been somewhere near Boston. And I would have been looking for work down there, but it's really difficult to get a job in Boston when you don't live there, especially in the kind of line of work that I want to be in, which is community development and arts nonprofits and, that kind of thing. And so I'm in this sort of hold pattern. And now that I've gotten my first vaccine shot and, it seems like there's a little bit of light at the end of the tunnel, I'm starting to put out feelers, but I just, I have not had a traditional career path. I've always been entrepreneurial, kind of, to my financial detriment, quite honestly. But I have the privilege and luxury to sort of step back and reevaluate what it is that I want to do. And my heart is in the nonprofit world. Like there's so many nonprofits doing such good work out there. Where do I go? What sector do I focus my energy on? And, for me right now, climate change is like, even beyond arts, important to me, because you can't have arts if we're all going to be, underwater, or, can't breathe the air. So I feel like I'd like to dip my toe into that arena. My experience with the EPA programs, the brownfields programs and stuff is a kind of natural pathway. And I'm looking at the viability of continuing on there to help, get rid of toxic buildings so that they can be repurposed, whether for the arts or for affordable housing. That's an arena I'm really interested in, and I feel like I have a little bit of expertise and experience in. So I don't know, I'm just, opening myself to the world. I have a ton of energy. I don't have the pedigree. I don't have the master's in community development or whatever, so I'm a bootstraps person that, has had 12 plus years of nonprofit leadership experience, who's learned a lot of, a lot of things the hard way, but has, I think, a lot of energy to offer. And so, yeah, I'm open to the universe. We'll see. I hope that we'll be moving closer to Boston at some point this year. We don't know what community.
You're back.
Oh my gosh, I don't know. My computer just decided to restart.
Oh,
And I don't know.
okay.
I don't know what happened there. So I apologize for that. I quickly jumped on my phone. And
Well, we're pretty much near the end anyway, so I think that we can continue. But thank you for signing back on. So one of the questions that I usually like to wrap up with is ask, what is something you'd want to make sure that people take away from hearing your story?
well, that's a good question. I think that, the most difficult thing that I experienced in the last few years, was this collision of different cultures, and I'm not talking about, immigrant culture. That was actually like a wonderful thing that I got to experience here, but our differences, right? So, I came in from, outside and got actively involved and wasn't always, well received. And part of it was, I didn't know how to navigate that. The cultural sensitivity is a really important piece, and you can see it in in the United States today, like, our political differences and our cultural divides and everything. And I think that's the thing that I love people to come away from this, if anyone bothers to watch it, is, a realization that, like, you can do great things if you can work together with each other, no matter what your differences are. Not to say that I did anything great by any means, but, it's just, I think it's an important lesson that I learned, listen more than you talk. Don't come in saying I'm going to change something when it already exists and people don't think it needs changing, or, it's that lesson of, like, how do you impact a community sensitively, and being aware of who and what went before you. Doesn't mean doesn't need to change, but, if you can do it with an eye to the past and inclusivity, you're going to impact more change. You're going to have more successes. And, I think that's the message. It sounds kind of corny, but, that's what I think.
Definitely a powerful message for sure. And is there anything else you'd like to share that you had been thinking you wanted to make sure that you shared with us, but it didn't come out because I didn't ask what I asked, didn't prompt it?
No, I feel like I blabbed on a lot, and I'm sorry for that, but, it's, I'm passionate about Engine. I still am, even though I'm no longer there. It's a good organization that is trying to do good things, and its success revolves around both the city and the city's people, embracing the idea of arts as change and arts as community development. So I would encourage people to, get involved in whatever the nonprofit is. There's so many people. The Biddeford Cultural and Heritage Center is a great organization, and my God, Diane has so much energy. And, I wish all of these little groups, so much success, going forward. And I wish for them visibility and, to be able to carve out a place in downtown Biddeford so that others can be part of it and not get sort of pushed away by, development. So yeah, that's my wish.
Wow. Well, Tammy, thank you again so much on behalf of Biddeford for everything you've done for us and also for taking the time today to share your story so that we can share it with others.
Yeah, thank you so much, Nicole. It's been a pleasure. And sorry it took so long, I think over a year and a half or something for us to connect. But,
We had this little thing called COVID that kind of
yeah,
impacted our timetable as well as impacted a lot of people for sure.
yeah,
So
yeah. Well, thank you. I appreciate it. And thanks to Diane and BCHC.